Yeah, do you hear me? Is it okay? Okay. Oh, okay. Is it okay? Okay. Let me
We got it.
It's okay.
Thank you
on.
so much. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's the. Is it on? Oh yes. Yeah. Do you hear me now? Yeah. Do you hear me? Okay. So do you hear me? No. I think the sound, the volume, you can increase the volume. Okay. It, yeah. Is it okay now? Is it okay? Yeah. Is it okay now? Some of our colleagues are just arriving now. We are waiting for them. Okay, is it okay now? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your patience. Some of our colleagues there are on the way they will arrive now, but before from there, I would like to thank everyone for your participation in this session. It's really your pleasure. First, I will introduce the agenda, what we have here, and what we will be working on, and who will be the speakers and panel members. Before this, I would like to have a consent. The session will be recorded, and this record will be also available online in the live stream, and then it will be uploaded to the YouTube. Is it okay for everyone? Is it okay? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. And basically, the first part of the agenda is a film that is recorded in Afghanistan. It is explaining how Afghanistan is vulnerable to climate change and what are opportunities and what are the main challenges that Afghan communities are facing with. It is a film from the rural communities, and then we will have presentations. We have two presentations from two different people. One presentation will be delivered by myself, basically key findings, what are happening in Afghanistan, what are climate crisis there, what are challenges, and what are opportunities. And another presentation will be delivered by one of the international stakeholders, international organizations currently working in Afghanistan, and he will also explain what they are doing, what are the opportunities, and how they are working in Afghanistan. And then we will have a panel. The panel members, we have 5 panel members. Basically 4, one will be me, I will be moderating. So the panel members, everyone is from different areas of their expertises, and they will explain what are main challenges in Afghanistan and what are the opportunities, and how these challenges will be technically solved. And they will talk regarding this issue. And then we will have 15 minutes for networking, answer questions, ideas, and everyone can share their ideas, take part in the discussions, and then we will have a closing remarks. So now I will ask our technical team to play the film. Thank you.
Afghanistan. This vast mountainous landscape, nestled in the Hindu Kush Himalayas, supports countless communities of Afghans who make their living off the land. But there is a silent crisis unfolding. As the world's climate changes, these very same mountains become a looming threat for the communities below. The sheer scale of the problem can seem overwhelming, but AfghanAid has been helping Afghans build their resilience for over 12 years. Initially by building huge defenses against the immediate dangers, and more recently by focusing down on the individuals within the community, strengthening productive livelihoods, which reinforces their ability to weather any storm.
Climate change is making life difficult and complex for Afghans. Fortunately, the solutions to that are really quite simple. There are 4 key elements, and Afghanistan has them in abundance. The first is water. Basically, the climate crisis in Afghanistan is a water crisis. The farmers are inundated by floods during spring melt and during spring rains. Then later in the year, we get dry spells and droughts, and people aren't able to grow enough food, their livestock aren't able to be watered. They have to sell them off, they have to kill them off. Over the past 20 years, we've gone from having typically 1 dry year in 4. We now have 3 dry years in 4. And in consequence, for the past 4 years, we've faced a food crisis where huge amounts of the population are being supported with food and cash. The only way out of this is to help farmers grow enough food. That means keeping water in the hillsides, making sure water's available to grow the crops that are needed and to water the animals. So our interventions are aimed at slowing down that water. We like to say making running water walk. It reduces the destructive capacity for the water. It replenishes the groundwater, and it makes it available for both drinking and for agriculture when it's needed. These interventions are so simple. It's really great to see communities out there working together with no fancy equipment, just picks and shovels. They're able to create these contour terraces, dig these trenches, plant these trees, and they can repeat it time and time again once you've shown it to them.
These simple but effective flood defenses slow the flow of water, but also work to replenish water in the ground. This means there is more water for future use, sustaining families, land, and animals through dry spells.
تاثیر شنیمی است که حال مردم از ناحیه سیل خاطر جمع است. همون جایایی که چک دام شده آب همینجا جمع میشه. در قضیه نمیاد. این قسمت‌هایی که جای از طریق بانکی کار شده، یونم به چالکنیا فایدهش همین که آب اونجا جمع شده.
نمی چلو نمیشه. این ما که زیر یو میبونده. نمی یو با بالای نمینا یو اومد. ایونی که همی چلو را کنده. اول یو نمیاید. امی یوی که می اگم میده بسیار کم میاید. امی اولیو میاید. اگر اولیو ای چلو نمیکندن، اولیو که به وقت رفته گمشته بوده اینجا.
حالات خوارامی حالات بود بانکی جور شد دما مردم پایدایش همی پایداست که یک خواهی ما بجا سیل دور خورد تنها در جان خود نیه پایدا دمی کلی ولس دمی کلی قیرایش پایدایش رسید وقتی که بان نمیشد ما مردم نه زراعت میکردیم آلی خربوزان میکاریم گندم میکاریم ترکاری و بانجان میکاریم از پروشیدن نه گندانه و ایشاد خوردن خانه.
It really has a very profound effect on the communities, and you see them really taking initiative to be able to exploit that, growing new crops, extending their agricultural area, improving the weight and yield from their livestock. One really positive consequence of supporting farmers to replenish the water table is that we're seeing many cases of them investing in solar-powered pumps, which allow them to extract the water, to irrigate greater areas of their fields, to water their animals, and of course to provide drinking water for their families.
اینمی سولار پمپ میقدر دما فایده کرده که یک وقت او از ولایت می اومد در جوبار روز 10 نفر سرش میکفید که او نوبتی ماست. ولی هر کس خودش یک سولار داره او میبره بدون جنجال. صبح که تا شام 1 روپیه مصرف نداره. او این سیستم قطره شو که بیخی 1000% است. سابق که بود اینمیجا نیالا که شنونده بودیم ما مردم می اومدیم بسته شورا نفرا جمع کردیم 100 200 نفر می اومدیم میگفتیم ده یک پارت یک بشکه مینداخت یکیش دین بشکه نتیجه امام ضعیف بود مردم زیلا میشد زیلا که میشد میرفتن خانه اولی 44 تخت زمین است 40 جریب است هر کدوم در جریب از یک قیتک داره من که میرم یک قیتک چهلا میکنم 2 ساعت دیگه بقیه هم کار خودم میکنم بدون زندگی و خستگی یک تختش در 2 ساعت میشه و در 2 ساعت دیگه اعلام میکنم دیگه بسیار سیستم بالاست یک سابق هوایی تو یک جوبار که اعلام میکنیم 5 متر جای همه شیشته میشد و هم ضایع میشد ولی تقریبا 4 1 متر جای هر رقم او بگین قطر هم تو نم اساس بدون جنجال میته علف هم خوبش میشه و درختم
Another fundamental element that Afghans need to adapt to climate change is fuel.
Once a beautiful patchwork of woodland and greenery, in recent decades, conflict and a need for fuel have meant that Afghanistan has lost 90% of its trees. AfghanAid works with communities to reforest and also helps to make sure trees stay in the ground.
Where we're helping communities to plant trees in the rangelands, we've also got to make sure that they don't cut those for the fires, for cooking, for warming their homes. Women typically working in the home, cooking in the home, have to cope with very harmful smoke, same for their young children. So we're working with women in particular to produce what we call biobriquettes. These are blocks made from manure, from organic material, from twigs, whatever they're getting off the forest floor. And these are then used in their homes to cook and to heat.
نام رازیه از دوابی چپدره 50 ساله ارزانه دیگه مو زغال خریدن نمیتونی یعنی میره تیر ماه سال جر میکنی زمستان تو گاتیش کردم میری یعنی فایدهش یا خانه مو گرم چای مو جش دیگ مو پخته دیگه این فایده داره امو برگمو در تندورم آتیش میکنی ولیکن دود داره خیلی دمو ضرر داره چشمای مو آسیب میگیره سینه مو نفس قیدی پیدا میکنی دیگه خانه گرمه دیگه بسیار از خیلی خوشی گلگوی نو دیگه در منطقه مو مو دیگه میره درخت‌ها رو قطع نمیکنیم از برگ میزی استفاده میکنیم که همین درختام سرسبز میمونه خودمون هم سیاد مومنی دیگه یعنی دود نداره دیگه دود نمیتا دود تنفس نمیکنه اولاد مریض نمیشه خودمون مریض نمیشه پیش دکتر نمیری بسیار دمو یک چیز خوبه
Afghanistan has a rich agricultural heritage that has sustained our people for millennia. Through investing in this existing local knowledge, Afghan Aid are helping men and women continue to build their own resilience.
Staple foods in Afghanistan are rice and bread. However, the country doesn't have the terrain that allows them to compete with the big flat countries with wide open fields that are their neighbours. And so we're encouraging and supporting farmers to grow the cash crops such as fruit and nuts and vegetables, with which they're not only able to contribute to the improved nutrition of their families, but are able to generate the cash that they can then use to buy the staples, to invest in education, invest in the health of their families, and to invest in
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the film. So it is a film. It is a little bit lengthy, but we brought major points here. That was really the situation of Afghanistan. It was well explained. Now we will have two presentations based on the agenda. The first presentation will be addressed by me, will be delivered by myself. So here I will talk about the climate vulnerability, or I will address the vulnerability as well as climate crisis in Afghanistan, solutions, and how we can approach, or what are the approaches. So next slide, please. Okay. Afghanistan is among the top 10 countries most vulnerable to the climate change in the world. And this country is affected a lot by climate change, and several disasters happening every year, as well as there are lots of other climate change related problems are happening in the country. As an example, last year in 2000, even in this current year in 2024, a flash flood hit Afghanistan, which took the life of more than 300 people. And then there were like earthquakes, landslides, and other hazards that are related to climate change. It destroys schools, infrastructures like schools. It sweeps agricultural land, as well as in Berlin. Climate change, when there was a flash flood, it swept more than 1,000 hectares of land. And based on the UN reports, they reported even last year that 25 provinces out of 34 provinces, they do not have water. It means that extreme drought hit Afghanistan, and the people are experiencing here. Yeah, do you hear me now? Okay, sorry. And the UN reports 25 is do not, and okay. Do you hear me now? Okay, thank you very much. Based on the UN reports, they reported recently that among 10 people, only 2 people have access to clean water. It means among 10 people, 8 people will not drink clean water. And this report was recently published by UNICEF, which it was a big issue in Afghanistan, and many stakeholders, they are now working on how to find out clean water for Afghans. So, next slide, please. And Afghanistan people are struggling with access to clean water, even in Kabul and other big cities. As before, I mentioned that while the UNICEF reported from 8 out of every 10 Afghan people, they do not drink clean water. There are some photos I brought here. The first photo is from one province in the southern part of Afghanistan that in spring season, actually the community people, they make a kind of hole and they collect this, the flood waters, and when there is flood in spring season, or there is flood in the another seasons, they are collecting water in the holes. And in other season, they are using the same water for their livestock as well as for themselves, even they are drinking the same water. And this is another photo that the people from one photo, they are livestock, they are using this water. And in another photo, we have people that they are drinking the same water and they are using for their home, like for their uses. And this is another photo that recently we had research in Kabul city. And in Kabul city, we found out several places that the underground water is going down. And in this photo, you see that people, they are carrying water even for 2 to 2 kilometers away. They are collecting water and bringing for their home uses. And in this photo, this was captured by me. It was a research when we were meeting with the people. We found out that before, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, the water was available in 20 meter or 30 meter, but now it is going down. Now it is not even available for 100 meter. And we found out that the communities, they were digging the well for more than 300 meter. They were dipping the wells. So it means that underground water is severely impacted in Afghanistan. And then we have natural hazards like floods, landslides, and earthquakes. UN reported that all 34 provinces of Afghanistan experienced some kind of natural hazards during 2024. And Afghanistan is prone to earthquake, specifically to earthquake, flash flood, droughts, landslides, and adventures. So here we have 2 photos. One is from a flash flood. I think sorry, change the slide. Here we have 2 photos. One is from landslide that happened in Afghanistan. It took the lives of several people and it hit several households and houses. And another photo is from a flash flood that happened in northern part of the country in Baghlan province, which destroyed houses, infrastructure, and took the life of more than 300 people. Yeah, another slide, please. Okay, another problem is a severe drought. As I mentioned before, that the drought is an extreme problem in Afghanistan. It is the only case that the people are now leaving their houses, their communities, and they are migrating to another provinces, another places. This drought significantly hit the lives of the people, especially agriculture. Well, there are reports that 80% of Afghan people, population, they have direct or indirect relation with agriculture. While there is extreme drought, while they do not have water for their agriculture, it means that they will experience extreme poverty, and they will have no income, and they will have no production, agricultural productions. So this problem will make them to make a displacement or to migrate to another location, another places. Here we have two photos from different places. One photo is from Farah, another photo is from Nyamroz. And these two provinces, these were agricultural land where there was trees, there was like agricultural land, the people, they were crop, the people were getting productions, and they were producing like different kind of production, internal, external even. But now, while there is drought, while there is no water availability, now these communities, they migrated to another places internally, and they displaced internally and migrated to even another countries because of no water. You see, before the organizations and stakeholders, they were trying to find drinking water for agricultural water for communities, but now they change their path. They want to find drinking water for the people. Now the agriculture is aside, and now they are trying to find the drinking water for those communities. Another slide, please. Okay. Climate finance for Afghanistan. This is a very big issue now happening in our country. However, Afghanistan is among the top 10 countries, most vulnerable countries, and this country has among the lowest contributor countries of greenhouse gas emissions, even less than 0.1%. So this country is suffering, this country is not benefiting from the global financial commitments. After 2021, most of the financial commitments and financial mechanisms, they start financing climate change projects in Afghanistan. This is a big problem. And Afghanistan is excluded from the international agenda. Afghanistan NDC is not accepted, and the revised NDC is not accepted by the parties, so Afghanistan is not benefiting from the GCA fund, Green Climate Fund. And Afghanistan is also not part of the loss and damage fund, which recently established. So these are the major funds that Afghanistan is not accessing. And this fund, not access to this fund, is affecting the communities, not even the government. Because of the recognition of the government, Afghan communities cannot receive this fund. So this fund, it means that communities are the most to suffer. Communities are in danger, and they are suffering now. And however, there were lots of development projects, but now after 2021, most of the development projects were stopped. The support, financial assistance was stopped by the donors, international organizations. But recently, in 2024, some of the projects restarted, and some of the fund refinanced to Afghanistan. And now the stakeholders, like after 2021, most of the stakeholders, international organizations, they were focusing on humanitarian issues to fund humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. But now they changed their path, and now they are coming from humanitarian to development. It means the climate crisis are hitting Afghanistan. Now they will come to the climate change sector. This is a decision made by the global donors recently. Next. Okay. What to be done in Afghanistan? We recommend several ways and several parts for Afghan people, for international organizations to finance Afghanistan in different ways. The first thing, if Afghanistan NDC is not accepted, if Afghanistan is not accessing adaptation fund, loss and damage fund, but who are suffering? The communities are suffering. Who are most infected? The communities are mostly impacted by climate change. So in this case, it is important that if the communities consider working with the communities directly, if this loss and damage fund, adaptation fund, just if I would directly name these large funds, these are political funds, and this should go to the governments. But since the government is not recognized, so we have different national and international platforms available in Afghanistan, and this fund can be forwarded to them. For example, in Afghanistan, we have consortium of NGOs. We have different associations of national NGOs and international NGOs. Instead, we have community shuras in communities, Meliks. Now the theme is a little bit changed. We have Meliks, wakils, they are leading communities, elected by community people. So this fund can go directly to the communities, not to the government. This is a pathway, can be a solution. And we have two plans. One is long-term plan, one is short-term plan. In long-term plan, we have big projects. If the big projects cannot be financed now, we have short-term plans. The short-term plans could be implemented. When we were coming to the COP29 conference, we visited lots of provinces. They were impacted. The community solutions are there. Communities are suffering. So in this case, the urgent need is required, or the urgent solution is required to enhance the resilience of those impacted communities. So this was my last slide. Thank you very much. I hope there was something in the film, and now we will give a chance to our other colleague who is working in Islamic Relief, and he is working in Afghanistan. He will provide his presentation. Thank you.
Let me know if you can hear me. Does it work? Okay. First and foremost, I would like to thank the ODI Pavilion. I've been a few of the sessions over the week and the past week. It's been a very insightful pavilion with a lot of great sessions, and particularly the panel sessions. I just wanted to give that shout out in the beginning. I also want to thank Brother Abdul Hadi for giving me the platform to speak. Can you hear me? Some people can hear me, some people can't. I just gave I expressed my gratitude. So just quickly, my name is Akram Abdurrahman. I work for an organization called Islamic Relief Sweden. We're a humanitarian organization operating in the hardest reach areas with the highest IPC levels. And also in regards to what Abdul Hadi was referring to, Afghanistan being one of the most climate vulnerable countries, our organization have interventions and projects that deal with climate vulnerability at the localized level. And I will share some insights from my work. So we are working with something called Climate Vulnerability Capacity Analysis. It's a framework that was originally adopted by CARE International, but Islamic Relief has now modified the model and adjusted it for humanitarian contextual settings. So it is a framework and a practical tool that can be used by local stakeholders, which is something that Abdul Hadi was mentioning, in a contextual setting like Afghanistan, where the climate finance is not channeling, and there's a big gap between government representatives and local communities and local organizations. This is a method that can streamline localization, streamline local adaptation by using participatory approaches. So in our case, the goal is to build capacity. I don't like the word capacity building because I think everyone can benefit from capacity building, but capacity sharing and capacity learning of country offices and also NGOs, government representatives, and local stakeholders. And the goal is to ensure that we have a streamlined CVCA approach. And we utilize the frameworks of the Paris Agreement and, of course, Sendai framework of disaster risk reduction. and the planned humanitarian response. So it's actually a multi-year, multi-country program in 4 countries: Ethiopia, Somalia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. But I've highlighted Afghanistan because the goal is for us, and also in the context of Afghanistan, to contribute with preparedness for climate vulnerable communities. In our case, we are focused in the 3 regions of Balkh, Bamiyan, and Nangarhar. And as we know, as Brother Abdul Hadi highlighted eloquently, there are many, many challenges when it comes to adaptation, streamlining climate finance, but of course also disaster risk reduction. And the way we have implemented the methodology is essentially, first and foremost, a community-based approach. You deal directly with the communities. It's workshops, it's formulating vulnerability matrix and hazard maps, that kind of approach. And then it's evidence-based advocacy and awareness streamlining, so that once you have the data, you can extrapolate that and share it with the local authorities, the National Environment Protection Authorities, and so forth. And last but not least, it's an integrated approach that deals also with ensuring that you have, let's say, the UN Food Security Cluster coordinators are also involved. And we try to have the Venn diagrams of climate adaptation, SDGs, and the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And I have some contextual references to Afghanistan. This is my colleague Huzaifa Hilal. He's meeting with the National Environment Protection Authority in Balkh. So again, in order for us to streamline reducing climate vulnerability, you have to do it from an integrated approach. You have to work with the government representatives, you have to work with CSOs, you have to work with academia, even have to work with private sectors, but of course the most important stakeholders that are vulnerable to climate change, such as small subsistence farmers and people in IDP communities. So we are dealing with workshops with stakeholders such as community and faith leaders, and finding the necessary data and information that the communities on the ground have identified for their climate adaptive needs, so that we can then integrate into their own localized community preparedness plans. So what can the CVCA be used for? That is a question that even myself ask myself often. But here is an example from Panjshir in Afghanistan after flooding a few years ago. So as you can see, we have men who are carrying the livestock in light of flooding. So the CVCA procedure is a 7-step procedure in which we identify the needs on the ground, the adaptive capacities that are existing, but also what are the gaps that can be filled. And number one, it can be used for community-based adaptation plans. So we identify the needs and the capacities that are already existing, and then from there on, based on the contextual setting, we can come up with a specific plan. Also, for awareness and advocacy, once you have the necessary information and contextualized information that is relevant and data-based and evidence-based, you can then communicate and advocate for the specific need that is contextually at the table for the community on the ground. And last but not least, which is something that I focus on in my organization, and I believe other people here, such as Abdul Hadi's organization, you can utilize the information for projects and program design. So usually humanitarian organizations, when they do an intervention, they do something called needs assessment. They use baseline values. So in this case, you can use this as a complementary to the needs assessment and the needs analysis. So this is just quickly how it's utilized. It's a frame, and this is how we have formalized the CVCA procedure. It's a thorough step that comes with an analytical framework as well. But basically, you define the scope, and then you meet with the community, and then you do the workshop exercises. So I can give you an example from the image that I showed you the other slide. So let's say a climate vulnerability capacity analysis on a rural community in Panjshir, where you meet with rural wheat farmers after flooding. So it might seem obvious when a flood might hit, but if you don't have a contextual understanding, there's going to be many, many gaps. So let's say we find out with the workshops on the with the wheat farmers that in addition to heavy devastating floods causing death to livestock, death to human beings, we also might have seen through the data that increased soil erosion and additional livestock displacement. So with this data, we can come up with a specific contextualized DRR method to avoid and cope with impacts of future floods. And this helps with increased resilience, localization, and of course the hot topic that I love so far is early warning and anticipatory action. We believe that with this data, with this procedure, it can contribute with preparedness for future crisis and capacity building for future climatic events. And this is one of the workshop sessions called Hazard Map, where you basically map the specific hazards based on climate modeling, but also climate trends. And this was taken from a village in Tanzania by CARE International. This is our own at the moment. And we also have something called the vulnerability matrix, where the community themselves, they will highlight which specific sectors, which specific infrastructure is vulnerable to what specific climatic events. They might say during a drought period, we are very, very vulnerable. Our agriculture is more vulnerable than, let's say, our businesses, for instance. And then you will rank them and come up with that analysis. And this is our colleagues in Afghanistan. It starts from our offices and meeting with NGOs and meeting with government representatives. And then from there on, having a gateway between communities on the ground, but also the relevant stakeholders as well. And this was example, this is me in the black cap with the blue dress. This was in Ethiopia. We met with an IDP community, climate-induced IDP community in Somali region, an IDP cell called Farburu in Gode. And now our colleagues are here working with the communities as well, and the local disaster risk management committee in drafting mock preparedness plans based on the data that the communities themselves are giving us. So when we met with, I was in an all-male group, they gave us few answers. We had colleagues that were in an all-women group, they gave us other answers. And then we had a mixed group, they gave us few answers. So we understand that depending on the context and the perspective, you will have specific adaptation needs for climate change. And with that being said, I would like to thank you so much and pass it over to the Abdelhadi and the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and we really learned what you are doing in Afghanistan, and and what other stakeholders. It's something that you and other stakeholders now they are considering climate change focused projects in Afghanistan. That's really remarkable. So now we will invite our panels. The panel members will come to the stage. Just a moment, I will name them. Mr. Shoaib Sadat, please come. Dr. Saib Abdullah Fahimi. Mr. Akram Yasin Abdurrahman. Dr. Giriraj Amarnath. I hope I spell your name well. Yeah, thank you very much. Now we will start our conversation with the panel members, and we will learn from them, and we will hear from them how they are working and what they are currently working. Yeah, thank you very much. Let me start with Mr. Shoaib Sadat, who is representing youth. Mr. Shoaib Sadat, could you please tell us what are the youth's engagement in Afghanistan, what are their demands, and what are their requests and suggestions, even our expectations from this conference, and as a youth, what you are doing here? Thank you.
Thank you, Achakzai Saib. I think I should remove my headphones. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you, Achakzai Saib, and the whole team, the ODI Pavilion, and everyone present here. I'm happy here to talk about youth and their engagement in climate change and climate issues in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is land of resilience. And its youth embody this spirit. We are one of the countries most vulnerable to this climate change, but despite years of conflict and different instability happening, the youth still take action and are still on the front right to fight the climate change. This shows their commitment. Um, they're not only witnesses to what is happening and see the impacts of climate change, but also passionate advocates for bringing a change. Uh, from grassroots initiatives to the awareness raising and such initiatives that they're taking, it's their commitment that show how they're involved and how much they want to do something for it. Before coming to this COP29, when I was coming here, I thought like when you go there, it shouldn't be just me. I should bring the voice of what you think and what people think of what are their concern problems and how they want it to be addressed. And we organized a series of events from 34 provinces. We had youth, women, and also relevant stakeholders, NGOs, CSOs, and we talked to them about their problems, what are their challenges, what are their concerns, and what they recommend for internationals currently in this situation. So I'm here just to bring this message to you and also share with you what were they thinking. The first and important thing that they were asking was a neutral stand for environment and climate related issues in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the current political situation makes it very difficult for Afghanistan. We are not considered and not part of negotiations and discussions in Afghanistan, discussions in such important important forums and conferences about Afghanistan. So the first thing that not just youth and all the community was requesting was that to not politicize this issue and let Afghans at least do something against the climate change. But when you are talking about the effects of climate change in Afghanistan, it's not just at the end of the day, people are suffering. Around 40 million people are living in Afghanistan, and this political situation is taking time. But climate change is something that's happening right now, and action should be taken. So it's important to act right now and do not politicize this issue. The second important thing that they were demanding was inclusion in international climate discussion, including conferences such as this COP. They want their voices to be heard, their ideas to be valued, and their unique challenges to be recognized. I see that among these around 72,000, how much people that they're coming to the COP. There are just few people from Afghanistan, and especially few representation of youth. So therefore, it's important to have them in such places. At least their voice should be heard, what their ideas, and that should be valued. And it's important. The third important thing was call for capacity building programs in Afghanistan, which can help us to be more resilient to what's happening and have capacity within the country. Unfortunately, we see currently in this situation, there's lack of information and awareness within the country for the youth, not just youth overall, and this makes it very difficult to cope with the current situation. And we also have less opportunities for studying in this regard or going abroad on scholarships and things like that. And the standards are too high for Afghan youth that they cannot achieve those standards and get a chance to do this education on this issue. So this was very important. And also we see global solidarity. They ask for direct investment in youth-led projects and projects that are in favor of environment for Afghanistan and climate issues in the country. So overall, as I saw it, that Afghan youth are not seeking sympathy, but they are seeking opportunity. They are ready to act. They are ready to take action and be initiative, but there's restriction of resources, opportunity, and also their voices not being heard. So that's overall what they wanted, and what we want as youth in Afghanistan, to be involved in climate action and do something, because this is not just for Afghanistan when you involve youth in climate action. This is also something for the whole planet that we can protect. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadasaf, for your information. Dr. Raj, right? Okay. since you are expert in disaster risk management as well as in climate resilience and climate planning, so I want to hear from you. You also work in Afghanistan in a very critical time. So Afghanistan is one of the countries which is suffering a lot, and there are lots of problems, especially in climate change. And now the situation is very good for climate resilience. So we would like to hear from you. What are your insights? Thank you.
Thank you, first of all, for inviting International Water Management Institute for this important session. I'm Giriraj Amarnath. The International Water Management is a member of a consultative group of International Agriculture Research. It is in briefly called CGIAR. Right? It's a global organization focusing on food, land, water, food system. And IWMI is one of the global organizations dedicatedly focusing on water management around the world. We have our headquarters in Sri Lanka, and we have presence in 15 countries. And unfortunately, we don't have office in Afghanistan, but we have nearest office in Uzbekistan and Pakistan. I had an opportunity to visit Afghanistan in early 2020 on the invitation of World Bank to set up the drought early warning system with the national partners in early 2020, and then we have to exit in June 2021. That's where the declaration of drought happened. So I just want to set the context where I am from Afghanistan. The presentations and the video were really eye-opening when it comes to climate shocks and the vulnerability. And when we were in the mission in Afghanistan, the main bottleneck of challenges was vulnerability data. Now, who needs the most when it comes to access to water distribution or water scarcity? You've spoken about out of 10 population, 2 only have access to clean water. Now, where do we get this data? Across the national level, when we have issues of flash flood, drought, and flood, etc. So, the household data to collect on an annual basis is a very challenging topic. And unless we don't integrate early warning to early action, it is difficult to translate these publicly accessible information to make drought resilience or flood mitigation program in the country. So it all begins with the quality of data and the information that can help in food security outlook. Then we can talk about climate resilience strategy going forward, because the data is very, very fundamental. We do have quality IPCC climate change scenario data is available, but then that has to translate into sectoral planning as well. How does the next 50 years climate change is going to impact national policies in climate change or adaptation? You mentioned about NDC. You have the National Adaptation Plan. We need to translate at a subnational level. Then we can talk about developing the risk management tools going forward. In terms of our partnership with the Afghan Meteorological Department, National Water Resource Center, we established this Afghanistan drought early warning system. But again, there were limitations of integrating in the cloud to credit cards and others. So we are looking at follow-up of how we can reach out to some donors to strengthen that early warning capabilities in the country. Because early warning is a very prerequisite for shock responsive strategies to social safety net. You talked about drinking water. All the mobilized funds are required, providing dry ration for few months, providing fodder for animal. We have looked at if in Amudarya, if there is a snow deficit is there, how does it's going to impact the pastoral farmers? The pastoral farmers would have not only the crop damage, but also the livestock have to be sold out because there is no livestock, fodder is available. So you need to look at a whole system thinking here. It's not just talking about one or two sector, and the systemic resilience really calls for a broader transformative adaptation focus, where we need to connect land, water and food system in a broader context. And then one of the key area we have advocated in Zambia is a lot of people talks about all this climate shock. The main focus of all this is to build resilience in the watershed or in the catchment level, what we call is a basin development plan. So we need to start from the broader scale and then we can go out to the district, to the community level. We can't start everything from community and then talk about the national issues, right? So we need to look across the scale, across the sector, and the multiple institutions as well. So that is where you can work together this framework and then prepare a climate risk management strategy that would really help in to prioritize country like Afghanistan to look not just for the next 2 years, but look at next 10 to 15 years. Building a long-term resilience cannot be just a shortcut method. You need to really plan an integrated approach, and that really calls for a long-term investment. I am not a person to bring investment. This is where the government and the donors would look into that, but we are more research for development organization. We can tell what can work, what cannot work, but this is something we can provide some more guidance if it is required. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insightful points. It was really important. Now, Dr. Seb Abdullah Fahimi, you are a climate change and energy specialist. So, what are your insights regarding Afghanistan vulnerability to climate change? And now we have potentials in energy. What is the energy we can build, and the renewable energy can be built there, like hydropower, solar panels, as well as wind. What are your insights and recommendations for Afghanistan in this in your expertise area?
Thank you very much. Thank you all also to the panelists who have spoken before me. At the moment, so I've been researching the context of Afghanistan since 2016 for 8 years now. At the moment, I work as a research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations, where I unfortunately do not have the role to prioritize Afghanistan as a context currently, but I have been studying the country for the past 8 years. And your question, you started with what are the climate risks? That's a very good question, because also as Dr. Amarnath mentioned, there is a lack of data, and we do not, we know what are the general problems that Afghanistan faces because of climate change, but we need to know, we need to have more data also on district level, on province, community, village level. The major risks are floods, droughts. Over the past, you also mentioned in your own presentation, over the past 20 years, the rate of or the frequency of drought years has increased very much, and floods are more frequent, also, but also very deadly. The flood that you mentioned, extreme weather events, we experience them more often now. The temperature goes really high in the summer, but also in the winter you have really unexpected, like towards the end of winter, you have unexpected rain, which was not the trend before. And these are the risks, but what do they translate into? So picking up from what I just mentioned before that we need to have more data and to study the context. Afghanistan, if we look at the context of Afghanistan, it is an agrarian country, heavily reliant on agriculture. That means really droughts, floods, especially these two are just deadly for the economy and the community, because the people are reliant on this sector predominantly. 75% to 80% of the people are engaged in agriculture. You also mentioned the problem, also the other panelists, the problem of now the government not being recognized. I was really hoping that the representatives of the Taliban regime who are present here, I was hoping that they would be here and we could also engage with them. But this is a problem. But it seems like we all agree that we need climate action in Afghanistan. We need more climate finance in Afghanistan. if it is not going to go through the government, which the international community appears to follow this path, maybe we could search for other pathways. As you mentioned, community-based community-based approaches, maybe engaging with communities. I heard from I've not had direct contact with the delegation or the people who have come here as observers. I've heard that some of the climate finance mechanisms, they want to in some way start engaging with local NGOs by either accrediting them and recognizing them as partners. But this is really this should pick up. Afghanistan, is, as you said, is the one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, but at the same time it's also experiencing other crises. The deadly combination of conflict and climate change is something that only few countries, I mean there are around 30 countries, but these countries are in active warfare, active conflict. You do not see in so many countries intersecting with climate change and then both posing so much risk for people. I leave it there, but if there would be more questions on climate policies and how the international communities should engage with Afghanistan further, I'm happy to discuss more.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saib Abdullah Fahimi, for your insightful information. Now, Mr. Akram, you delivered a very good presentation, and now you are as an international organization working in Afghanistan. We would like to hear from you. What are your lessons learned from your work in Afghanistan? And as an international organization, you are leading climate change focused projects from another countries, and you have national international staff in Afghanistan. We would like to hear from you your lessons, your learned things, and your experiences in Afghanistan, especially in the current context. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is it audible? Okay, perfect. No, in addition to what our other panelists have mentioned, I would like to highlight I have been working in the Afghanistani context for the past few years now, and we have a country office based in Kabul, and then in the provinces, as I mentioned before, in Balkh, Bamiyan, Nangarhar. And so in addition to, if I could just highlight on what Dr. Abdullah mentioned, we speak about Afghanistan being very climate vulnerable, but it's more than climate vulnerable, it's multi-layered, the risks. So for instance, if I can contrast to the Horn of Africa, I am of Ethiopian descent. So in Ethiopia, we usually have floods or drought, primarily, and with the consequential effects. And then of course, because of lack of climate resilient infrastructures, you have flash floods. Afghanistan, you also have heavy storms, as I think Dr. Abdullah mentioned, and we also had major disasters. We had an earthquake in end of 2023. So it's not just climate vulnerable, we have a multi-layered extra risk, you can say, in addition to history of conflict, the nexus of peace and instability. So our lessons learned, and of course with the gap of from the institutional side, the international side, with climate finance, lack of mainstreaming to the national adaptation plans and so forth. The lessons learned that it is hard, and I think Brother Shoaib mentioned as well, the capacity as well is needed. And I think your film highlighted with the examples of the women doing the organic for household cooking. We need more of that. And who will fill that void? Is it the institutional donors? Is the international organizations, the country offices? I think for the local communities, and I would be happy to sort of engage after this panel so that we can see how my colleagues in Afghanistan can sort of join forces. But that's also lessons learned, and also and I think it's already been highlighted, but if you compare, let's say, for Ethiopia, the way they have streamlined DRR, disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction, it's very integrated in their climate framework. And it's also a political issue, I can say. So when the previous prime minister, when he got in power, he saw an opportunity that, the world is now moving into this section, maybe we can tap into climate finance. Whereas I think the mainstreaming that awareness in the public sector in Afghanistan, there's still a lot of room for awareness raising and mainstreaming. And lessons learned from my project, we also have a project in Ghor, where we work with WASH, is that there's a potential for renewable energy, for, let's say, solar-driven water pumps. But unfortunately, the gap at times with, let's say, as far as my experience goes with Islamic Relief, is the gap between the public sector, the authorities, and the humanitarian organizations and the local community. So I think with your organization, with the EPTO and stakeholders, we need to bridge this gap and inform so that the respective authorities can tap into the existing research. As we hear from Dr. From CGR, there's plenty of research that's there already. So that's why our organization, we focus on the reducing vulnerability via participatory approaches, because that's where you can work at the moment. You can work at the community level, and maybe that can be the building blocks of influencing to the levels above. So those are my lessons learned, I would say.
Thank you very much for your good information and for your engagement in Afghanistan, especially in very rural communities. We will have a short round of Mr. Sadat. As you mentioned, your activities and your engagement and representing youth, especially you had meeting before coming here to the COP conference. You meet with different youths and different associations from youth. What are your hope and expectations from this COP conference? I mean, will the youth that you meet them, or while here in your different sessions you raise the voice of youths, do you think the youth's voice will be heard here? That will be a kind of a force, something like this, that we will, for example, when you go back to Afghanistan, of course you will be asked by youths, and they will be asking you how you raised our voice, and how much you are hopeful that our voice will have a reaction, something like this. So it will be considered. What's your idea on this?
Thank you, Achek Zaiseb. So this is my first COP, so first experience, and being there, talk about what are their voices. I had the chance to speak in different pavilions. We had our friend who left today. She also had the chance to speak in different pavilions and at least raise the voice of youth of the country. And we also get a lot of good engagement as well. I'm happy that a lot of people from different organizations, and they're interested to know more what's happening on the ground, how youth are engaged. So I'm definitely taking a good experience here from my side here. And I'm very hopeful that these won't be just words, and we will be able to see the action soon. But still, as I said before, from a big country with a big population, and also in a big conference, this is still not enough. We have to do more and more, and we need more representation. We need more attention to the country most vulnerable, but with least contribution, but at the same time least presence. This is sometimes makes me running these days. I was there from the beginning. I feel like wow, we are not heard that much. Still, I got the chance. We all had some possibilities to do something, but it's still not enough, and we have to do more. So in some way I'm hopeful, because we had productive meetings and productive places that we talk and had the possibility to raise those voices. But let's see how will be the engagement after that, who will follow up, and what we can do next. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Sadat Saif. We have, the time is running out. So, Dr. Gerard, you talked about the issues happening in Afghanistan, especially water management. That is a big issue in Afghanistan. We have water, but not managed correctly. And you also talked about the policies, strategies, and climate risk strategy especially. what do you think climate risk strategy? Well, the government should start, or there's no any other option. They could start from the communities, right? While they are developing. What is your insights, specifically, on climate risk strategy development?
Thank you for that question. Um, as we talk about water, too much or too little water is a problem. We get sometime too much water like flash flood, or too little water is your drought. That's where the water scarcity comes. I think it cannot be just leaving the entity to some individuals or community. It should be a whole of a society approach has to be looked at. As I said in my previous intervention, we need to look at a national scale to local scale. That's where water resilient practices have to be promoted more, from the basin, watershed to the district, etc. That's very, very fundamental. We cannot just say farmers to start bringing your water efficient practices. How much of the reservoir do we have sufficient to meet the demands for future water requirement for domestic use, for industry, or for water consumption by the, for livestock or for human, right? So you have shown that the vulnerability levels for Afghanistan, and it's going to be even more increasing with the climate change, right? Because our resources are very limited in terms of financial access to adaptation or mitigation program. So we need to begin in a more broader perspective. Climate risk management, when I say we need to invest more in climate preparedness, in terms of risk assessment, in terms of policy planning. More importantly, there are so many policies are there in the country, anywhere in the world, not just Afghanistan. But how do you bring a more coherent policy? Coherent policy in the sense, how does the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries, Horticulture, Tourism, Energy sector, all have to come with an integrated thinking. Otherwise, what happens? We allocate budget to each ministries, and then each ministry will think only in their domain of interest. But then we need to bring a more transformation for which all the multi-sectoral focus has to start. So the preparedness budget for disaster risk management is very crucial. And then we talk, lot of the funds are available in the emergency time. Somebody provides relief fund, somebody provides a very limited resources. Emergency funds are very limited. But the UN have very clearly told, if you invest in $1 in climate preparedness, you can have a net income or net benefit over $15 to $20, depending on the country and the kind of impact. So let's start thinking, the risk management, more preparedness, emergency focus should be moderated, and also more towards the rehabilitation, recovery. So you need to have all those institutions, the available resources across those pillars to make sure that the country like Afghanistan will be more resilient in future course of climate change vulnerability and its impact going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information, really insightful and important technical information. Dr. Saif Abdullah Fahimi, you mentioned about data is not available in Afghanistan. That's correct. It is a big problem, and most of the data is from even more than, I would say, before 2025, 2015, 2018. It is a problem that update data is not available. What do you think? Well, there is no data, and the policy is policies of Afghanistan. If that is adaptation policies, mitigation policies, anything that are not updated. In current situation, what is the pathways? What are the alternative options? And while you conducted several research and you were involved in climate change issues in Afghanistan while you were doing research, like for research, what are your recommendations? What are alternative options that they can use, especially while the data is not there, updated data, if the policies are not updated? What specifically you were doing, like while you were conducting the research?
Thank you very much. I think the message that I want to give here is very clear, that we should not, or the international community should not leave anyone behind. leave no one behind. That means 40 million people in Afghanistan, and that means 200 million now living in areas beyond state control. So if you do not recognize a state, a government, you cannot justify, holding off funding for climate change, because you do not recognize the government in Afghanistan. And I think the international community must engage. I mean, we are talking about, in this COP, we are talking about moving from billions to trillions, and from 2020 we should have received, not Afghanistan, but in general the global south countries, 100 billion every year. And I wonder how much of that went to Afghanistan, because there were only, when I was doing my research, my dissertation, there were only around a dozen and a half projects through the multilateral funds, the GCF, GEF, Adaptation Fund, very recently. But all of these projects, around 20 or so projects, were put on hold when the Taliban came to power in 2021. And except one or two projects, all of them are still on hold. They need to be resumed, and work must be started there. So more concretely, you can work on the agriculture sector, you can work on the energy sector. For example, if we just go into energy, I could talk for hours. If you just look at the energy sector, there is deforestation in Afghanistan. Why is it such a rapid and fast deforestation? It's because people don't have access to energy. They need something to warm their homes, to cook, and they go to the forest to cut trees. So everything is connected with everything. The deforestation problem, the agriculture problem, the energy system. Afghanistan has 300 sunny days in 1 year, and the country where I live now, in Germany, there are 180 days of sunny days in a year. And compared to that, the radiation, the number of sunny days in Afghanistan, you could produce gigawatts of energy and even export. I mean, let's forget about exporting, but just to meet the needs of the people. So even if the international community, for very good reasons, also, I mean, looking at the Taliban's policy of excluding women from every aspect of public life, even if the international community do not want to engage with the Taliban, do not work with the Taliban, they can work with the people, with the communities, with the local NGOs, and implement these projects. We had really good, successful example from the 20 years when the international community was present in Afghanistan, and they implemented this community-based project called National Solidarity Program. In this program, the communities defined their own projects, and then the funders gave the budget to implement. You can go to communities and ask them, what do you need? Do you need a dam to produce electricity? Do you need an irrigation system for your field, crops, everything? There is really a lot that can be done, and my message is that we should really not leave anyone behind.
Thank you very much, Fahim Issa, for your clear message and good points. Of course, that's an issue. Finally, Mr. Akram, you as international stakeholder working in Afghanistan, what are your final recommendations to share with other your international organizations to focus the same as Dr. Sababullah mentioned? We have this time. Okay.
Yes, in addition to what Dr. Abdullah mentioned, leave no behind and do no harm. And in regards to, and I'll be brief, in regards to the lack of data, I'll give you another lessons learned from our projects, and not just us as international donor, but other international donors. So because of, and maybe Shaibi have seen this, because of the priorities from the current government, and I've told you this as well, they emphasize a lot on hard activities, build wells, build latrines. Advocacy No. Soft activities, they even shut down some of our projects, the authorities, which means that either there's an information gap or there's a conflict of interest. So we need to, as Dr. Abdullah mentioned, we need to uplift the needs on the ground, because at the end of the day, who are being affected by this? It's the people of Afghanistan. It's the most vulnerable communities, let alone women as well, who are not in the inclusion procedures, who are oftentimes lack of representation. So we need to focus on the information and bridging the gaps, as I mentioned, in a holistic manner from the academia, from the youth, and also from the humanitarian and development sector as well. Because in order to have resilience, you need to work holistically and interdisciplinary. And as far as me being an advisor for resilience and environmental climate, the needs are there. And we also, I think we forgot to highlight something, the deportations of refugees from Pakistan, also causing another example of vulnerability, So all of this is combined. The nexus of the dynamics of climate change is evident. But I think we need to focus on the raw data, whether it's from academia, from the youth, and how to translate this to the authorities so that they can somehow understand that contextually speaking, we need to invest for our own sake. Abdullah mentioned if you tap into the potential of solar energy in Afghanistan, you could even export in the future, let alone meeting the sufficient needs in Afghanistan. So I think from a humanitarian point of view, we focus a lot on the quote-unquote relief emergency responses. We had an emergency response after the earthquake, but you need to sort of uplift and highlight that this is not in a silo. And I think Dr. Iraj mentioned that we shouldn't conduct things in silos. We need to have an integrated approach from policy so that it's not standalone implementation. So that's my final takeaway. And we hope that sooner rather than later we can see a mainstreamed and streamlined procedure for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, the panel members, for your time, your dedication, and the great information you delivered. It was really meaningful, and it was really something that we learned from you and academia, youth, and humanitarian organization. All are engaged in somehow in Afghanistan activities, and you pointed out the vulnerability, extreme vulnerability of Afghanistan, and here you also point out what are the opportunities and the recommendations to consider Afghanistan in the future. I would like to thank the ODI for their dedication, for their dedicated team, committed team. They really provided us an honor. It's an honor of you all. We are extremely happy, and the voice of Afghanistan from the academic side, from the humanitarian and from the youth side was delivered here was really meaningful, and I would like to thank every one of you, the dedicated team of UDI, for providing the pavilion to us for this time. So now we will have, if there was any question and the panels are here, you can ask them in the introduction or in the networking. We will have a networking, and the session is finished. I'm sure you will have another session. So thank you very much. Your pleasure. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Working? Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. Real pleasure to have you join us in this session on transboundary climate risk for Southeast Asia. We've had the distinct privilege of hosting this session, BCG and Adaptation Without Borders, and together with the Stockholm Environment Institute and other partners. We're using this opportunity to launch a piece of work to lay out the case for transboundary risk management in Southeast Asia. And we'll be followed by a great panel discussion with Kathy Harris and Karina Chan, whom I'll introduce shortly. Now, to kick us off, this report is public, it's been released, but we thought it would be helpful to just do a quick drive-by summary ahead of the discussion, and just 10 minutes to give you an overview of this topic, why it's important for Southeast Asia, and why this, beyond Southeast Asia is something that should be managed actively by all parties involved. So with that, I'll dive into a quick presentation. You find this online, so this is going to be a quick summary. So this is a shared perspective with between BCG and Adaptation Without Borders. It's been a great collaboration. Thank you for all the partnership in doing this. It's a big topic for Southeast Asia. As BCG, we've been deeply involved in the adaptation agenda for a number of years, and this is an area that is certainly underrepresented. Now, why is this a problem? Adaptation in general tends to focus on the national issues. So you have national adaptation plans, you have locally led adaptation, you have financing that is primarily channeled towards national and subnational priorities. So very often we're seeing this issue of transboundary climate risk fall between the cracks. And increasingly, we're seeing the effects of how supply chains, water, food, can be impacted and have cascading effects across borders. And this can be quite material. There are some estimates point to transboundary risk being 10x that of national risk because of how interconnected we are as a world today. And when you look at national adaptation plans which bring together the agenda and adaptation for a country, very few have addressed this issue of transboundary climate risk. In fact, we've done a scan and found two countries that have referenced this issue in their national adaptation plans. Now that said, there are regional organizations, the EU, the African Union, ASEAN to some extent, recognizing that this is an issue, but still a ways to go in terms of how you manage it and how you reduce that risk over time. So when we talk about transboundary risk, what are we talking about? There's the biophysical connections, and Kathy will talk about this, in much greater depth. That's water, natural systems. There's trade links, how interconnected we are with supply chains, financial flows. So where one makes decisions on FDI and investment driven by climate risk exposure, and forced migration and human mobility that is going to be exacerbated with climate impacts. I'm going to share a bit on some of these effects that are projected for Southeast Asia, and you see four here on this page. You see the interconnected nature of water, the Mekong Delta as one example where water security cuts across 4 or 5 countries. You see trade impact, so an example recently in Thailand where flooding caused a disruption in the auto supply chain that impacted multiple countries from Japan to Indonesia and so on. So multiple cascading impacts. We see the impacts on shared natural resources. So for example, the fish stock in the South China Sea, where increasing temperature is projected to force migration of the fish stock and really impact the food security of 4 or 5 countries in Southeast Asia. And then there's finance and financial flows, where impacts in one country not only have financial impacts across borders, but also when you look ahead, it impacts the decisions on where private sector across borders would invest in FDI. So that's one example. I'm going to go a bit deeper on one issue, and that's on climate migration, which is by many accounts a understood and understudied area of climate risk. Now, this is some work that BCG has done together with Cambridge University on assessing the impacts on climate migration related to water in particular. You see here some historic numbers on internal migration. It gets quite pronounced and quite worrying if you start looking ahead. These are some numbers on migration, projected migration, in a worst case scenario looking out the next 5-10 years. In Southeast Asia, there's a projection of, in the worst case scenario, we could have something like 800,000 people displaced, and this is across borders. So it's a material issue that can cause multiple stresses in both the regional economies, but also in the fabric of society. So what do we do? How do we manage this? What could a roadmap for transboundary climate risk look like? And again, we'll ask Kathy to elaborate on this, from the examples in other areas. But the African Union has started to address this with a way of understanding the risks, getting organized around platforms to address it and mobilize resources around this. So we'll get into this in our fireside chat shortly. And what does it then mean for Southeast Asia? A couple of things to take away from practices and examples from other places. One is use the institutional mechanisms that are available to accelerate this action to address these issues. So ASEAN as a platform is one example. Understanding the impacts, just creating transparency on what does it mean for the countries in the region, for bilateral areas of interest. Just putting some visibility and numbers to what it means to trade, to investment, to people, and really bringing in the scientific community and policymakers to elevate the issues and make it clearer in terms of the implications of what you could do about it. And finally, there are regional cross-border issues, but you want to engage civil society and local organizations to address some of these impacts. So some lessons to be learned, and certainly this is only a subset of things that one could do. So to wrap up this summary, what could Southeast Asia do? Well, first, build a comprehensive collective understanding of what these transboundary climate risks are. Second, start to enhance and develop a framework, and it could be around ASEAN, it could be other mechanisms as well, to bring the parties together to understand and also start to shape collective action priorities. And finally, all this has to hit the ground, so getting into specific projects and programs that hit these cross-border issues, whether it's on food and water security, or whether that's in trade and supply chains, moving that agenda forward. So that's a quick drive-by. I encourage you to download the report and look into it. It's my pleasure now to introduce our panelists for a fireside chat on this issue. We have Kathy Harris, who's been a great collaborator on this piece from Adaptation Without Borders, who's also part of a senior research fellow in the Stockholm Environment Institute. Karina Chan, who's the CEO of the Singapore International Foundation, and also a catalyst in setting up a platform for addressing some of these cross-border issues in ASEAN in water. So with that, welcome. I will put this on so that I can hear as well. So first question, maybe Kathy, starting with you. You've looked at this issue for many years. What are some of the learnings that you've gathered that if I put it this way, we know it's an issue. What are the ingredients to start getting some action mobilized around this?
Thanks so much, Dave. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today in a very noisy COP, talking about transboundary climate risks. We've really seen rising awareness of these risks in the last few years, driven, if I can humbly say, but by the efforts of the Adaptation Without Borders Partnership. We are a growing global partnership. We're led by a consortium of 3 organisations, so the Stockholm Environment Institute, ODI and IDRI, but we're at 10 organisations from around the world who collectively have been working to really strengthen international cooperation on adaptation to manage transboundary and cascading climate risks. And this is really a topic that's gone from relative obscurity a few years ago. We came together in 2019, literally around a round table at a COP in Bonn, or maybe it was 2018. I'll probably get corrected on that in a minute. And we really felt that the discussions on adaptation planning were really being driven by a very limited or narrow understanding of climate risk. That when countries were commissioning their climate risk assessments and drafting their adaptation plans, that they were really looking only at the impacts of climate change from within their borders. But actually, we are all connected. So if we think about how a country might be exposed or vulnerable to climate change impacts, we also need to account for that country's dependencies, their connections, their vulnerabilities as they relate to other countries around the world. So last year at the COP, we saw the first decision text, I would say, on transboundary climate risk, and I can talk more about that in a moment. But there is still a huge gulf, I would say, between ambition to act on these issues and actual action to adapt to these risks. And happy to talk more about this, but not to take up too much time now. We see in Adaptation Without Borders that there are 3 pillars of work that is needed. So first of all, we need much greater understanding of these risks. We need tools to identify, assess, measure, track these risks that are complex and uncertain and difficult to quantify. We need engagement with policymakers around the world, not only those that are often the ones driving and delivering national adaptation plans in countries, but trade ministries, foreign ministries, finance ministries, all the different ministries that these risks affect, that they really affect the capabilities and the mandates of these different ministries. And we need to drive cooperation right from the local level. We hear a lot about locally led adaptation, and that is important, but we need adaptation and we need cooperation across scales. So we need cooperation happening bilaterally between countries, regionally, being driven by the regional organizations, and also internationally as well. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Kathy. We'd love to dive into a bit deeper, with some examples as we get into the discussion. Karina, you've had a long experience in driving impact programs, across the region. You've now set up this platform for water, and water is a big issue in Southeast Asia. Too much and too little. It's we're seeing it increasing every day. What would you say are some of the things that you're hoping to achieve with the platform, and where do you see the cross-border nature of issues being addressed with this?
Thank you, Dave. So, in Southeast Asia, we wanted ground-up initiative as well. So more so than top-down, since transboundary risks related to climate need the buy-in of local community. So we started this initiative, a platform called the Southeast Asia Partnership for Adaptation Through Water. This is a partnership with the World Economic Forum. So we initiated the talks and we started talking about it in February. The initiative was launched in June, and very fast, Katie, you were talking about action. So very fast, we have already put together our first project. It was announced like yesterday. The first project in Sarawak in Malaysia, helping to deliver clean water. And that's because the source of water has been affected by climate. And this is really bringing multi-sector stakeholders. So CPAW is the acronym for Southeast Asia Partnership for Adaptation Through Water. We aim to bring together people with the knowledge, so like BCG is a member, people who have got the solutions, people who have got the financing capabilities to look at projects in Southeast Asia. So that is the start. And more often we look at water as it's an interconnected issue, as you know. And the reason why we would like to focus on adaptation is because so much attention has been on mitigation. Adaptation, we need to really look at it because it's about resilience. And 90% of adaptation relates to water. And hence, that platform is set up to do that.
Thanks so much, Karina, and congratulations on the first project. It's fantastic to see in such a short period of time that a platform is starting to catalyze action on the ground. We certainly need much more of that, across the region. Kathy, if you're okay to go a little bit deeper on what you've seen as what works, maybe with some examples. You mentioned the need for understanding the application of tools. You mentioned using institutional mechanisms, and I guess in some instances you have mechanisms that exist and you can use those, and in some areas maybe you need to create new ones, right, for it to work. And there's also this question of in understanding these risks, there's so much that is it's a blind space, right? Yeah. Because I just reflect a bit on that Thailand example, and that's closer to home. Who would have thought 3 countries would have that level of impact? And there was an insurance write-off of something like 15 billion. I don't think anyone understood that was going to be the case, right? So maybe just get reflections on how do you start to really unpack this understanding piece to a further level.
Yeah, great question. Actually, King's College recently this year released a study suggesting that climate change impacts on global supply chains could reach 25 trillion in net losses by 2060. I mean, these are huge numbers, and we've really only just begun to scratch the surface when it comes to understanding how our economies and our societies are at risk as a result of climate change. And really, governments, I would argue, really have to rethink reimagine what they mean by adaptation. Yes, adaptation should be locally led. Yes, adaptation should be context specific and culturally appropriate, and it has to work for people, for the people for whom these risks actually manifest. But we can't always push action down and the responsibilities down to the local level. We're absolving governments, regional organisations, international organisations from the responsibilities that they have to adapt to climate change. But also we're missing harnessing the opportunities that they could play in driving the adaptation agenda. And this is only going to get more critical, right, as the world continues to warm. So in terms of good practices, I can sort of give a few examples. So at the national level, we have seen some countries really take proactive steps to try and integrate transboundary climate risks into their climate risk and vulnerability assessments and into their national adaptation plans. They're learning by doing. And I think there is no blueprint for how to do this yet. There's no well sort of regarded or very robust or well accepted way at the moment to integrate these risks into risk assessments, but some countries are at the vanguard. They're doing it, and there's much more that we could learn from those efforts, and I think they're willing to share. The risk is there, though, that it's the countries that have the resources and the capacities to do so. So a number of countries, for instance, we're seeing across Europe, the UK, for example, is a real front runner in this. They've identified a number of transboundary climate risks that they're exposed and vulnerable to in their latest risk assessment. They've really integrated them into their third national adaptation plan, and they've even assigned risk owners. They've assigned every single risk an owner within government, and that risk owner's mandate is to work across the government, across different ministries, to look at how the government responds to those risks. So that's an example of good practice. We need many more of these, but we also need to encourage knowledge sharing and much more cooperation on how we do that between countries. And just maybe one more example at the regional level. We've seen an increasing number of regional adaptation plans and strategies. You mentioned some of those in your presentation, that are starting to sort of recognize that their member states are vulnerable to these risks, and perhaps as a regional bloc they can do something to work together, to cooperate, and to collectively build resilience to these risks. So just to give 3 examples, ASEAN State of Climate Change report from 2021. I mean, that's a report, but it was really one of the first, along with the European Union adaptation strategy from that year, that really recognized the transboundary nature of climate risk. And then we've seen in 2022 the release of the African Union Climate Change and Resilient Development Strategy, runs for the next 10 years. We've seen some really very proactive efforts by African ministries, also by the African Union Development Agency, and by the African group of negotiators here at the COP to really raise the sorts of transboundary climate risks that African member states face. And they often face what we call double exposure. So they're very affected by the direct impacts of climate change. They are also very affected by the transboundary impacts of climate change. And on top of that, they've got some of the least resources to cope. So it's essential, but there are some really encouraging signs and some best practices starting to emerge.
Great, thanks, Kathy. It's great to hear about the positive signs and almost like organic response that we have this issue, we need to deal with it. I'd love to pick up with you later on this issue of risk ownership, because if something is spread across multiple boundaries and it's a collective problem, but who owns it is something that perhaps is not always clear. So we'd love to pick that up with you in a bit. Karina, taking a Southeast Asia lens, and you've seen it from multiple vantage points and so on. I guess 2 questions. One is given the nature of Southeast Asia, highly diverse, there's very different starting circumstances for each country, but also highly interdependent and interconnected. What would be some of the areas of priority that you think would be important for Southeast Asia, on the transboundary end, and secondly, given the ASEAN platforms and what you've seen and the platforms you've created, are there some lessons and learnings on how do you catalyze collaboration in the region that you think are worth raising to the fore?
So I think while institutional platforms are useful, sometimes we need to be a bit nimble and we need to move fast. I think that was the genesis of why we thought a platform such as CPOR would be able to work with multi-sector stakeholders and move a bit faster. And we want to focus on projects. So we just go beyond talking, which you hear at many platforms. People talk, people share. People say that this is good to do, we need to do that. But after that, it stops. And then you'll be wondering, what next? So when we created the platform, I think we were very focused that projects, actions, and collaborations very important. Multi-sector stakeholders. And we want to work with the government. Because we work on projects and we can only do pilots. Because I think no amount of funding will be able to scale projects and make that kind of impact in a certain country that we want to implement our projects. So working with the government is important, but we get the rest of the house in order first, which is working on with people to curate the projects. So water is one. What we are doing now, we are working with stakeholders on agriculture, rice planting. So in Southeast Asia, rice, huge producer, huge consumer. And when we talk about adaptation, it really affects the smallholder farmers, the rural communities. When we talk about piloting means that the different geography, different soil conditions, different weather actually it impacts how you grow rice. So we are now working with a solution provider who is a member of CPOR. The solution works to reduce water, reduce fertilizer input. It's very precision using drip irrigation and fertigation to grow rice that can increase the yield for smallholder farmers, reduce methane, and in the longer term, there'll be carbon credits to be yielded. So we want the smallholder farmers who actually make up 80 to 90% of agriculture production to transition to a sustainable way of growing rice. But to do that, we also will need to give them some motivation. So things like, being able to offtake the rice produced is important. So there is an example of how we approach projects and under CPOR, looking at pilots and looking to scale. And it's important to get the private sector in. And yesterday we had a session, we talked about, to get the private sector in, transparency, data, all these are hygiene factors before they would come in. So while working on projects, we are at the same time working with foundations and private sector and the government to look at financing for these projects to be able to scale. So I think Southeast Asia is very complex. I mean, look at ASEAN, 10 countries. Each country has got its own liking for rice. So it's not like one variety of rice works for all 10 countries, no. Yeah, so we need to also localize and contextualize what we are bringing to a community. Buy-in from communities is very important because we can put in the policies, bring in the help. Government regulations can set something up, but if the communities don't buy into what you're trying to do, it's wasted, yeah.
Thanks so much. Karina, I think just wanted to pick up on this example you gave, because I think this is a really fantastic example of how also a solution, an adaptation solution to a transboundary climate risk doesn't have to be transboundary. It can happen at the local level. So let me give you an example. So Southeast Asia produces a lot of the rice that the rest of the world eats. Of course, it's also very much eaten and traded within the region, but it's also traded internationally. And it's a problem. It's a problem for the world. It's a problem for the world, not just Southeast Asia, but if climate change threatens the yields of that rice. And if we can then adapt to support small-scale farmers to adapt to climate change, the effects of climate change that are happening in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, also in South Asia, in India and so on, then we need to capture that in terms of the resilience building, not only that does locally, in terms of livelihoods, in terms of adapted water supplies and so on, and water accessibility, but also internationally, because if that's then strengthening the food security of countries all around the world that rely on rice to eat, that rely on the rice as an import. And this is where our adaptation investments, if we're smart, could really pay double dividends. They can be, with the same investment, strengthening the adaptation of rice, small-scale rice producers and farmers in Southeast Asia, and the food security of countries all around the world that are dependent on that rice that is grown for their food security. And we did a case study on this, for example, looking at Senegal and what happens if imports of rice for a staple crop, staple food commodity such as rice, is curtailed because of climate change impacts, and the effects this can have in terms of sort of tripling prices and local markets that can then lead to riots in the street and so on. So this makes financial sense, but we've got to get better at capturing and quantifying that investment in terms of adaptation and resilience building.
So just to elaborate a bit more about that, right? When we talk about scaling, so one part of scaling is you do pilot in country. If it's successful, it scales with funding from either the MDBs or the government. But the other part of scaling, which is kind of related to what you have said, is also scaling the approach. because once this is proven successful in terms of even how you work with the farming community, that approach, that methodology, whatever you learn from there can be scaled to the region and other countries. So that is what we hope to do. I mean, we are very new. The initiative was only launched in June. First project announced. Now we are working on a second project, and we've got partners, members, about 20 of them from multi-sector, trying to work on something. So for rice, for example, we know that drip irrigation is actually the most effective when you talk about reducing water. But drip irrigation is not cheap, it's expensive. So part of what the partnership does is also with the solution providers, try to innovate and look for solutions that are cost effective for implementation. Yeah.
It's truly a fantastic example on food security. What you're doing in one country has such knock-on effects, cross-border, and that Senegal example, really brings it to life, right? If what happens in Southeast Asia impacts rice prices in Senegal by 3x. I mean, this is a global problem, right? So I mean, it's a really great example. I know we're also running short of time, but this is a fantastic discussion. With each topic we get into, would love to just keep going deeper, right? It's fantastic. And Kathy, if you're okay, to kind of unpack that a bit further. This idea of one understanding these risks. I mean, you did a case study for the rice supply chain, and you shed light on the issue. First question is, if you had the opportunity to set the agenda on which areas of cross-border risk that you would really prioritize and look into, right? Which would those be, given the many that you've seen over the years? And the second is coming back to the earlier point on risk ownership, given that it is multi-stakeholder problem, and certainly actions at a local level would have impact, but beyond that there must be more that needs to be done, right? So the issues don't fall between the cracks. Where are you starting to see appropriate coverage, ownership, accountability on these cross-border issues that allow them to be managed, right, in the appropriate way? So two questions, whichever you prefer.
Big questions. I'm going to be a typical academic and dive your first question, but only to say that I think it's really difficult to prioritize the risks at the moment. Where should you start? Transboundary climate risks cross not only countries and continents, they cross sectors. We've talked about so many different types of risks today, from movements of people to, and it's not actually the movements of people that are risks themselves, but if those flows are poorly managed, but to risks that can accrue from changes in remittances, to diminishing returns on foreign direct investments, to trade and supply chains and so on. It is very difficult for governments at the moment to know how to prioritize. Like, where do they start? And it will look different from country to country, depending on how their economy is structured, how their society is structured, and so on. We do know that certainly the more sort of open economies, those that are sort of really globally integrated and connected, will of course be more exposed. It stands to reason, the more dependencies and links you have on others, the more exposed you might be. But realistically, every country in the world is globally connected now. So what this really calls for is the development of tools, methodologies, assessment frameworks, so we can begin to assess, well, first of all, identify these risks, then begin to assess how likely they are, their magnitude in different places, and then begin to track them over time. How are these risks changing as our climate warms, but also how they interact with other non-climate drivers to sort of compound the risk or sort of amplify it even more. And we need more, and I would say this again coming from a think tank, but we need more case studies. We need to understand how these risks are already manifesting and materializing in different places, We need to know how they're affecting different groups to different degrees, so those who are most vulnerable in our societies. And we need to look across different geographies to understand how they are materializing in different places. And we released the Global Transboundary Climate Risk Report a couple of years ago that did start to explore these issues, but we feel as a partnership there is a need to do much more, but to really do research that equips decision makers and policy makers with the information they need to make those decisions, to be able to prioritize, to know where they should look to first, where they should really focus. So that's what I would call for there. On risk ownership, remind me of your question.
These issues are cascading across border, so it's everyone's problem, but who owns it? So how do you unpack that and how do you manage this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's, we call for much greater dialogue to try and unpack and dissect this. I mean, you take the example of transboundary climate risks to trade and supply chains. What role should the private sector be playing versus what role should the public sector be playing is complex, and it's impossible to sort of create a general understanding. It depends on the supply chain or the value chain or those involved. So it really requires much stronger cooperation, very practically, between the private sector and between governments to look into what each side can do and to really unpack some of the myths and assumptions going on here. Because often a lot of the governments, civil servants, policymakers we talk to really think that the private sector have got this all in hand. Like the private sector, used to managing risk across their supply chains. But the private sector companies we're talking to are saying, actually, we need a much stronger enabling environment from governments to do this. These risks are of a level of magnitude greater than perhaps the sorts of risks we've faced before. And our traditional tactics and strategies, such as diversification or substitution of products that we're used to helping us manage risk and hedge risk and so on, will be less effective when climate change is happening all around the world and creating a much riskier world overall. So we need much greater dialogue to really unpack in specific cases who does own these risks and who can and should play a role in managing them.
Thanks, Kathy. And complex problems will never have a silver bullet for it, right? So we need to create the tools and create the transparency, the capacity, and maybe unpack it, an area at a time, or a bilateral agreement at a time, and just expanding from there, right? So this is to make it practical and actionable. I would love to open up to the audience for any questions or reflections you have. But before that, maybe a final question, Karina. A bit more on what's next for CPO. You're having the projects that are coming to life. You're impacting immediate adaptation issues that have cross-border impact in the region and frankly beyond as well. How do you see the priorities for CPO looking ahead, and any other reflections for ASEAN on this issue?
Before I go into that, I think I just want to share a thought on risk, right? I think more often than not, the risk for many stakeholders is the uncertain environment, the uncertainty. I mean, it could range anything from policies to regulations, and the risk of looking short-term and not looking long-term. I mean, when you talk about projects, when you talk about adaptation efforts, it's a long journey. But, many people, especially in a politically sensitive environment, I mean, the short-term need to show something, to use something, actually is a risk itself, because then it limits your longer-term effort, because you're just focusing on the next thing that's going to happen, maybe the next election and all that. But the longer-term focus needs to be there. I mean, the next thing for CPOL is it will be just very focused on a project. So projects implementation is definitely one part of it. We are also working very closely with the GCEW, the Global Commission for the Economics of Water, the report has come out, the recommendations are there. Many of it relate to water. So insofar as we are working very closely with GCW in terms of implementing some of the policy recommendations in the region. So that is another key item that we are going to work on for CPOR.
Fantastic, Karina. And the water issue is now, with the Global Commission, it's just raised how transboundary it is, much greater than what we, the general public had visibility on, right? With the cross-regional flows of moisture and so on. So it's really fantastic. I highly recommend everyone to read that report. We have a few minutes. We'd love to open up for any reflections or questions that, Richard.
Yeah, thanks very much. I wanted to pick up on a point that Kathy made earlier in the decision text of last year where parties called for international cooperation. In your view, when it comes to transboundary climate risk, what would be the nature of that international cooperation that is needed?
Great question. Collaboration, cooperation can take many different forms. I think clearly there's an opportunity for cooperation on the technical level, to really pool resources and share information, both to pool resources to develop some of the tools and frameworks that I've been talking about, but also on the technical level to share information about the risks that each country is facing, but also how they're planning to adapt to those risks. And one of the things we've not talked about much today, but which certainly ODI take a very strong lead on, is that the effects of adaptation actions can also have transboundary consequences. We tend to think of adaptation as being inherently benevolent, but it can also create winners and losers, and what might enhance the resilience of one group in one country might undermine the resilience of another. So it's really important that on a technical level, we're sharing information about the risks, but we're also sharing information about how we adapt to them. But it also needs to happen on the political level, and I believe we need much stronger bilateral cooperation between countries on adaptation. Adaptation should be a top priority for countries as they think about their international relations, as they conduct their foreign policy. Right now, everybody's focused on mitigation, but adaptation needs to really be elevated to become a political priority as well. So we're going to need bilateral cooperation between countries to manage risks, particularly where those risks sort of flow between them. We need regional cooperation, and we've been working particularly SEI and ODI, but with the African Union Commission, with the African regional economic communities, with the member states, to look at how we can encourage and strengthen regional cooperation to manage these risks, and have got various decisions coming out of that from AMCEN and other places, and a roadmap that we've actually developed to say, what does this cooperation look like in practice that you mentioned earlier? And then we need more of the international cooperation. Transboundary climate risks should be, such a stronger feature of the discussions here at the COP than it is. And we got that decision text that I mentioned before in the global stocktake, in the global goal on adaptation, where parties for the first time recognised the transboundary nature of climate risk, called for more international cooperation and knowledge sharing to come up with adaptation solutions. But just because we've got that text in there once doesn't mean it's there to stay, right? And some of these risks are political, but we risk countries, taking a very protectionist approach, putting up walls, trying to defend themselves by closing themselves off from the world, and that is actually the most risky thing that they can do. Globalization is here to stay. These risks are here to stay. We need cooperation if we're going to manage these risks effectively, and that should echo at all levels, from the local scale to the global scale, in terms of these sorts of forums and discussions.
Great point. One more question, one reflection on this. I can't imagine anyone is better off by walling off your city, right? Can't imagine that's a good outcome.
Thank you. It's great to see the private sector here today on the stage, represented by Boston Consulting Group. The question is, I guess, why is Boston Consulting Group interested in this agenda? I mean, it's a very it's a large management consultancy. It has, I think something like, is it 12.3 billion annual revenue, something like that. So why is Boston Consulting sort of interested in it? Is it because the private sector is starting seeing that this is an agenda that needs investment and that needs financing? Kind of just to get your take from that perspective.
No, thanks for the question. There's probably a few answers to that from a Boston Consulting Group standpoint. So the first is that we've been involved in this adaptation agenda for a number of years. It started off with our social impact practice, right? So, as a firm, we have a dedicated social impact practice that is intended to contribute to development impact, outcomes that are good for communities and so on. So it started off there before it started to hit the private sector. There's many years. Increasingly, this is becoming something that is a high priority for corporate clients, because they are faced with impacts on their supply chains, they are faced with impacts on their manufacturing facilities, the health of their workforces, right? These are all issues that they'll need to deal with, and like countries and regional economic blocs, companies and sectors are not very well equipped to deal with this issue because, one, they don't understand it, they don't understand the range of impacts and the cascading impacts, and they are just getting to the point of how do you invest to adapt. This is something that is just just coming up. So coming back to BCG, our involvement started off from a social impact standpoint and has grown into something that is intersecting both the public and private, and our professional practice.
Yep. Thanks very much for the interesting panel. So I have a question today, actually more about disaster risk management. So I think today, I understand the topic of this is actually climate resilience as a whole, and today I think a lot of the discussion has centered around longer term adaptation planning. But I was wondering, where do you see room for more international and regional cooperation, let's say after disaster has struck and you need to respond to it? Yeah.
Great question. I'm going to open it up for Kathy and Karina if you'd like to take that one.
So disaster response, it's something that I think many international NGOs are in this space. But I think rather than looking at response, we look at how we prevent it in the first place. So I think one pillar of CPOR is looking at asset protection, and that's where we will work with our stakeholders, our members, to put in that resilience. So even for financial institutions, I mean, you're talking about insurers, for example, and more so they look at resilience insurance rather than trying to recover the loss when a disaster strikes.
Thanks. Yeah, we definitely look at disasters too. I mean, transboundary climate risks are generated through both slow onset warming and changes and slower changes to crop yields, for instance, but they're also, of course, spurred by extreme events, including disasters. And I actually think the disaster, like the DRM community, the disaster risk management community, has got a lot to teach the climate community more broadly. You look at the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, it's really strong on the transboundary nature of climate risk. And the global assessment reports that have come out in recent years have also been really strong in calling for much greater cooperation between countries to manage the cascading effects of disasters. I mean, the ASEAN State of Climate Change report, as I mentioned before, places the assessment and adaptation to transboundary climate risks as one of the sort of priority areas for adaptation by 2030. But there are a number of other, especially across ASEAN, number of other relevant documents. So the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, for instance, the work programme running to 2025, acknowledges transboundary climate risk and calls for transboundary risk assessment. So in short, I think the community has a lot to teach the wider community. I think the policies are often there in place. It's there in the right wording is there. But where we've got to get much stronger is putting this into practice. And this is, transboundary climate risks, whether from disasters or otherwise, are an inherently political topic. That alone accounts for not also because they're very complex, but that alone accounts for perhaps why we're not seeing as much cooperation on adaptation as there could be. But I think we really call on countries to overcome this, to look at what they have in common, their shared and common risks, but also the benefits that can be gleaned from them working in cooperation as opposed to in silos. That's also a role where we here at the COP can play in again starting to qualify and quantify what that looks like for governments. What's the cost-benefit analysis of working in cooperation versus working independently to manage these sorts of risks? So I think there's a lot more we could do in practice, but also much we can learn.
Thank you both. Any more reflections or questions from the floor? Great. I think we're right on time then. It's fantastic. It's been a great discussion. I'm going to ask you for a final word, on cross-border, something for all of us to take away. Karina and Kathy?
I think this week and for many of the convenings, we have heard a lot about the need for collaboration, the need to work together. But I think we need to move beyond the talk, and that's why I think we need to focus on action. And when we talk about collaboration, it's also in the true sense of collaboration. It's not collaboration on your own terms, and that's where I think we need to work towards.
Thanks. I'm going to echo Karina to say that, I think what this discussion has shown is that we've really done a lot to raise awareness of these risks, but we can't wait until we understand, everything about each of a transboundary climate risk or each type of transboundary climate risk before we start to think about what are the solutions to managing them. And these risks are already manifesting around the world. So we as a partnership are really focused now on trying to understand what are the solutions, what are the new partnerships we need to catalyze, what changes do we need to see, and to be bold and visionary in thinking about what does adaptation look like to these risks, and calling and holding to account adaptation funders who should be doing much more to fund cooperation to these sorts of risks. But those, again, right from the grassroots up to the global, who can design programs to build resilience to them. So I would end this with a call to action, which is that we need to start moving from ambition to action on transboundary climate risk and strengthening cooperation at all levels to manage these risks.
Great. Well, thank you both. It's been a great discussion, and I hope this has raised the issue amongst a broader set of constituents and people that can get involved and start driving action, collaboration, give and take, so that we get to better outcomes for us collectively. So thank you so much. It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you.